The fluorescent lights of Chicago O'Hare International Airport blurred together as Admiral Sarah Mitchell stumbled through the terminal, her worn military-issue backpack slung over one shoulder. Every muscle in her body screamed for rest. 72 hours. That's how long it had been since she'd last slept properly. 3 days of coordinating a classified rescue operation in the South China Sea that had saved 47 American lives from a sinking cargo vessel during a typhoon. But nobody here knew that. Nobody could know that. Sarah caught her reflection in a gate window and barely recognized herself. Her shoulder-length hair, once a rich chestnut brown now streaked with silver, hung in a disheveled ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, making her look 10 years older than her 48 years. The faded navy sweatshirt she wore, a relic from her academy days nearly 3 decades ago, was stained with coffee from the rushed Pentagon debriefing. Her jeans had a tear at the knee from catching on a ship's hatch, and her old sneakers had seen better days. She looked, she had to admit, like she'd been living rough. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just 6 hours ago, she'd been in the Situation Room being congratulated by the Secretary of Defense himself. Admirals, generals, and intelligence officers had shaken her hand, praising her quick thinking and leadership under impossible pressure. The president had called personally. They'd offered her a car, a security detail, anything she needed. All she'd wanted was to get to Seattle, to her mother. The text from her brother had come through during the debriefing. Mom took a turn. Doctors say maybe a week. She's asking for you. Sarah had felt her world tilt. Her mother, the woman who'd raised her alone, working 3 jobs, sacrificing everything, was dying. Nothing else mattered after that. Not medals, not commendations, not protocol. She declined the military transport, knowing it would take longer with routing and clearances. She'd shed her uniform in a Pentagon bathroom, pulling on civilian clothes from her go-bag. She'd raced to the airport, making the last commercial flight to Seattle by minutes. The ticket had cost her $2,400. First class was all that remained, but she'd have paid 10 times that. Now approaching Gate 14, Sarah tried to straighten her sweatshirt. It didn't help. She probably smelled like jet fuel and stress sweat. Her hands were calloused from years of shipboard work, her nails unpolished and short. She knew what she looked like, a tired, middle-aged woman who'd seen better days. Maybe someone down on their luck. Certainly not someone who belonged in first class. A perfectly coiffed woman in designer clothing gave her a once-over and physically moved her Louis Vuitton bag away as Sarah passed. Sarah noticed but said nothing. After 25 years in the Navy, rising through ranks in a male-dominated field, commanding submarines before most people thought women could, leading carrier strike groups through hostile waters, she'd learned to ignore judgment. Stares and whispers couldn't hurt you. Artillery fire could. Torpedoes could. Disrespect. That was just weather. She handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a young man who glanced at her ticket, then at her face, then back at the ticket with obvious confusion. This is first class," he said slowly, as if she might not understand. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. Is this your ticket?" Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she got when junior officers questioned her orders. "It is." He scanned it reluctantly, and she walked down the jetway, feeling his eyes on her back. The aircraft's first-class cabin was a different world. Leather seats in soft cream colors, warm lighting, the scent of expensive cologne and fresh coffee. Sarah found her seat, 2A, window, and collapsed into it with a grateful sigh. The cushion felt like heaven after the metal jump seats she'd been sitting on aboard the USS Roosevelt. She closed her eyes, trying to center herself. Just 6 hours to Seattle. She could sleep. Maybe. If her mind would stop replaying every decision from the rescue op, analyzing what she could have done better. The helicopter pilot who'd nearly crashed. The sailor who'd fallen overboard. The moment when she'd had to choose between waiting for weather clearance or launching immediately into the storm. They'd all made it, that's what mattered. They'd all made it home. "Excuse me." A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Sarah opened her eyes to see a man in an expensive suit settling into seat 2B. He was 50ish, with perfectly styled hair and a Rolex that caught the cabin light. He glanced at her, did a double take, and his expression shifted from neutral to disgusted in seconds. Sarah knew that look. She'd seen it 1,000 times, on ships when she'd first broken through as a female officer, in boardrooms, at official functions when people mistook her for someone's assistant. It was the look that said, "You don't belong here." She turned back to the window, hoping he'd drop it. Her phone buzzed, another text from her brother with a photo of her mother, pale and small in a hospital bed. Sarah's eyes burned with unshed tears. "This should be interesting," the man muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Sarah took a deep breath. Just 6 hours. She could endure anything for 6 hours. She'd once spent 18 hours in a submarine during a reactor emergency. She'd been through Hell Week at the academy. She'd survived a helicopter crash in the Arctic. She could survive sitting next to a judgmental businessman. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that this flight would become the hardest mission of her life, and it had nothing to do with military operations or national security. It had to do with something far more insidious, the casual cruelty of assumption and the dangerous speed at which prejudice can destroy dignity. As more passengers boarded, filling the first-class cabin, Sarah felt the weight of their stares. She heard the whispers, and she felt, for the first time in decades, utterly and completely powerless. The warrior who'd commanded thousands was about to face her greatest battle yet. And she was already exhausted. Richard Thornton settled into his first-class seat with the practiced ease of a man who flew 200,000 miles annually. He loosened his Hermes tie, placed his Italian leather briefcase in the overhead compartment, and retrieved his iPad, ready to review the merger documents that would close his latest deal. This flight was just another Tuesday, another city, another opportunity to add zeros to his net worth. Then he noticed her. The woman in 2A looked like she'd crawled out of a homeless shelter. Thornton's nose wrinkled involuntarily. Her sweatshirt, some faded navy thing that should have been thrown away years ago, was actually stained. Not slightly marked, but genuinely stained with what looked like coffee or worse. Her jeans had a tear at the knee, the kind that trendy people paid extra for, except hers looked authentically worn through. And those shoes, discount store sneakers that had seen serious mileage. But it was more than her clothes, it was everything. Her hair was a mess, gray streaks showing through in an unkempt ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except a plain watch. Her hands looked rough, nails unpainted and short. She had the weathered appearance of someone who worked with those hands, manual labor probably. A cleaning woman perhaps, or someone between jobs. Thornton felt his blood pressure rising. 20 years. 20 years of maintaining platinum status with this airline. He'd spent over $300,000 on tickets, accrued millions of miles, and earned the privilege of flying first class. He'd worked hard for this luxury, clawed his way up from a middle-class background, built his investment firm from nothing, made his first million by 35. And now this airline was letting just anyone sit up here. He jabbed the call button once, twice, 3 times. Where was the service he paid for? A flight attendant appeared almost immediately. A young woman with her hair pulled back severely, her smile professional but strained. "Yes, Mr. Thornton." Jessica Reynolds knew him by name. Of course she did, he made sure of that. "There's been a mistake," Thornton said, his voice carrying intentionally. He wanted the other passengers to hear this, wanted witnesses. A rather significant mistake. Jessica's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, sir. What seems to be the problem?" Thornton gestured towards Sarah with barely concealed contempt. "This person cannot possibly belong in first class. Look at her." He said it loud enough that several passengers turned around. "I mean, look at her. She's dressed like a homeless person. There's obviously been some sort of error with her ticket, or she's in the wrong seat, or," he lowered his voice conspiratorially, "maybe she snuck on board somehow." Sarah's eyes remained closed, but Thornton saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Good. At least she had the decency to be embarrassed. Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I'm sure there's no issue." "No issue," Thornton's voice rose. "I paid $2,400 for this seat, $2,400. Do you know what I could buy with that money? And I'm expected to sit next to someone who clearly, obviously, cannot afford to be here." He was on a roll now, feeding off the attention. Other first-class passengers were watching. Some nodded in agreement. "This is absolutely unacceptable. I have platinum status. I fly this airline exclusively. And this is the respect I get." A businessman across the aisle murmured agreement. "He has a point," the man said to his companion. "Standards should mean something." Emboldened, Thornton continued. "The whole point of first class is that it's supposed to be better, premium, exclusive, not a charity shelter for people who don't belong. Look at those shoes. Look at that sweatshirt. I wouldn't let my housekeeper answer the door dressed like that, and she's sitting in first class." Jessica's face flushed. "Mr. Thornton, if you'll just let me verify." "What's to verify? My eyes work perfectly well." He pulled out his phone, making a show of it. "Perhaps I should tweet about this. My followers would be very interested to know how standards have fallen, or maybe I'll call corporate directly. I have the CEO's assistant on speed dial, you know." The threat hung in the air. Jessica knew what that meant. Complaints to corporate, potential impacts on her performance reviews, maybe even her job. The airline didn't take kindly to upsetting their highest-tier customers. "Ma'am," Jessica said quietly, turning to Sarah, "may I see your boarding pass, please?" Sarah opened her eyes slowly. Thornton was struck by something in that gaze, a hardness, a weight that seemed incongruous with her shabby appearance. But then she simply reached into her pocket and handed over her boarding pass without a word. Jessica scanned it with her reader. Her expression showed confusion, then surprise. It's valid, Mr. Thornton. Seat 2A, first class, paid in full." "That's impossible," Thornton snapped. He leaned over, trying to see the pass. "Let me see that. There must be an error. Run it again." "Sir, I can assure you." "I don't care what your little scanner says." Thornton was fully committed now, his face reddening. A small crowd had gathered, passengers from economy who'd heard the commotion, flight attendants hovering uncertainly. "Anyone can buy a ticket. That doesn't mean she belongs here. Look at the state of her. She probably maxed out a credit card or used food money or God knows what to buy one first-class ticket so she could pretend to be someone she's not." Sarah's hands, resting on the armrest, curled into fists, but she said nothing. "Mr. Thornton," Jessica tried again, her voice pleading now. "The ticket is legitimate. She has every right." "Rights?" Thornton laughed sharply. "I'll tell you about rights. I have the right to enjoy my flight without feeling like I'm sitting in a soup kitchen. I have the right to be around people of a certain caliber." He straightened his tie. "If this airline values my business, and they should, given what I spend, they'll handle this appropriately. Otherwise, I'm sure Delta or United would be happy to have me." The threat was explicit now. Jessica's hands trembled slightly as she pressed her call button. "Mark, could you come up here, please? We have a situation." Thornton sat back, satisfied. Mark Chen was the lead flight attendant, someone who understood how things worked, who knew which passengers mattered. He'd fix this. Sarah still hadn't said a word. She simply stared out the window at the tarmac, her expression unreadable. But Thornton thought he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "Good," he thought viciously. "Maybe next time she'll think twice before trying to fly above her station." What Richard Thornton didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that the woman he was so casually humiliating had commanded more people before breakfast than he'd meet in his entire life. That she'd made decisions that affected national security while he was still trying to close his first real estate deal. That the cheap watch on her wrist was actually a Submariner's chronometer worth more than his Rolex, earned through actual achievement rather than purchased for status. He didn't know any of that. And in his ignorance, He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Mark Chen approached, clipboard in hand, his expression already hardening as he assessed the situation. The impeccably dressed businessman, the shabby woman, the obvious disparity. "What seems to be the problem here?" Mark asked, but Thornton could already see which side he was on. The battle lines were drawn. And Sarah Mitchell, warrior that she was, knew she was about to lose. Mark Chen had been a lead flight attendant for 12 years. He prided himself on reading situations quickly, maintaining order, and most importantly, keeping the airline's premium customers happy. Premium customers meant good reviews, tips, and job security. As he approached row 2, he'd already made his assessment. Seat 2B, Richard Thornton, platinum member, flew twice weekly, tipped well, complained often but corporate listened when he did. Seat 2A, a woman who looked like she'd spent the night in a bus station. Unknown quantity. Probably a one-time flyer who'd scraped together money for a single first-class experience. The math was simple. "Good afternoon, folks," Mark said, his tone professionally pleasant but his eyes already dismissive as they landed on Sarah. "I understand we have a seating concern." Finally, Thornton exhaled dramatically. Someone with authority. "Yes, we absolutely have a concern. This woman," he gestured at Sarah as if she were a piece of misplaced luggage, "is clearly in the wrong place, or something's wrong with her ticket, or, well, something isn't right here and I shouldn't have to spell it out." Mark turned to Sarah, his smile tight and insincere. "Ma'am, I'm Mark Chen, lead flight attendant. Do you have your boarding pass handy?" Sarah's jaw clenched. She'd already shown it once. She'd already been verified as legitimate. But she reached into her pocket again, her movements slow and controlled. The kind of control that came from years of forcing down rage in situations where showing emotion would be used against you. "Here," she said quietly, handing it over. Mark examined it with exaggerated thoroughness, tilting it toward the light, checking the barcode, comparing it to something on his tablet. Sarah knew what he was doing, making a show of it, demonstrating due diligence for Thornton's benefit. "It scans as valid," Mark admitted, but his tone suggested this was somehow suspicious rather than normal. "However, ma'am, I do need to verify a few things. This is a premium cabin and we have certain protocols." "Protocols?" Sarah's voice was level, but there was an edge to it that made Mark hesitate for just a second. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed, though he didn't recognize it as such. "Yes, protocols. Ma'am, do you have the credit card you used to purchase this ticket?" The question landed like a slap. Several nearby passengers gasped. One woman whispered to her husband, "They can't ask that, can they?" Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." "The credit card," Mark repeated, his voice firmer now. "Used to purchase this ticket. I need to verify it matches the passenger name." "My boarding pass matches my ID, which I showed at security and at the gate. You've scanned my ticket as valid. What exactly are you verifying?" "Ma'am, please don't make this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult," Sarah interrupted, her voice still quiet but carrying the steel of command. "I'm asking what policy requires a passenger to show their credit card after already clearing security, gate checks, and boarding." Mark's face reddened. In his peripheral vision, he could see phones coming out, passengers in economy craning their necks to watch, some openly recording. This was escalating wrong, but he'd committed now. Backing down in front of Thornton would make him look weak. "Ma'am, when there are questions about a passenger's ability to," he caught himself, but not quickly enough. "Ability to what?" Sarah's voice cut like a blade. "Afford the ticket, is that what you're suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm following procedures." "Bull," Sarah said flatly. The profanity surprised him. "You don't ask every first-class passenger for their credit card. You're asking me because of how I look. Say it." The cabin had gone completely silent. Even the background hum of boarding seemed to have quieted. Every eye was on them. Thornton seized the moment. "Oh, here we go, playing the victim. Classic. Look, if you legitimately purchased that ticket, just show the card. What's the problem? Unless—" He let the implication hang. "There is a problem." "The problem," a voice called out from economy, "is that this is discrimination." A young woman with purple hair stood up, her phone recording. "You're profiling her. I'm literally watching you profile her." "Miss, please sit down," Mark snapped, grateful for the distraction. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't. We're all watching you harass this woman for no reason." A few other passengers murmured agreement, but more remained silent, uncomfortable witnesses who didn't want to get involved. One elderly man in row 3 shook his head and pointedly put in his headphones. A mother in row 4 pulled her daughter close, whispering something that made the girl stare at Sarah with wide, frightened eyes. "Ma'am," Mark turned back to Sarah, his voice harder now. He needed to end this to reassert control. "I'm asking you one more time. Show me the credit card or I'll have to ask you to deplane." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Mark saw something in her eyes, something that made him deeply, instinctively uncomfortable. It was the look of someone measuring him, assessing him, and finding him catastrophically wanting. "No," Sarah said simply. "No," Mark's voice rose. "Ma'am, if you refuse to cooperate." "I've cooperated fully. I've shown you my valid boarding pass. I've answered your questions. What I won't do is submit to discriminatory treatment that you don't apply to any other passenger." She looked around the cabin deliberately. "Did you ask him for his credit card?" She pointed at Thornton. "Or him, or her, just me. Just the woman who doesn't look wealthy enough for your standards." "That's not," Mark sputtered. "That's exactly what this is." Sarah's voice was louder now, carrying to every corner of first class and beyond. "I served this country for 25 years. I've earned every penny I have. And I don't owe you or anyone else proof of my worth based on whether my clothes meet your approval." "She served," someone whispered, "like military." But Mark was too far gone to hear the shift in the crowd. His authority had been challenged in front of everyone. Thornton was watching expectantly. The phones were recording. He had to win this. "Ma'am, you're creating a disturbance. If you don't comply immediately, I'll have no choice but to call security and have you removed from this aircraft." Sarah's face went completely still. "You're going to remove me for refusing to show you my credit card while sitting in a seat I paid for with a valid boarding pass. I'm going to remove you for being disruptive and refusing to follow crew instructions." I'm sitting quietly in my assigned seat. "You're arguing with me." "I'm defending myself against discrimination." Thornton laughed sharply. "Oh, please. Everything's discrimination these days. Maybe if you dressed appropriately, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Actions have consequences, sweetheart." Sarah's hands gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles went white. Mark saw it and interpreted it as aggression rather than restraint. "That's it," Mark said, reaching for his radio. "Security to Gate 14. We have an uncooperative passenger refusing to follow crew instructions. Need immediate assistance with removal." The words echoed through the cabin. The purple-haired woman in economy shouted in protest. Several other passengers joined in, but more remained silent, some nodding in agreement with Mark, others simply wanting the disruption to end so they could take off. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they were suspiciously bright. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "The only mistake," Mark replied coldly, "was letting you board in the first place." Two airport security officers appeared in the doorway within minutes. They were young, mid-20s maybe, and looked uncertain as they took in the scene. "This passenger needs to deplane," Mark told them with finality. "She's been disruptive and refuses to follow instructions." "Ma'am," one officer said to Sarah not unkindly, "we're going to have to ask you to come with us." Sarah looked at them. These young men just doing their job, caught up in someone else's prejudice. She looked at Thornton, smirking in his expensive suit. She looked at Mark, self-righteous and assured of his power. She looked at the passengers, some recording, some looking away, none helping. And she stood. "I'll walk out myself," she said with quiet dignity. "I don't need an escort." She reached for her backpack, and for a brief moment her hand trembled, just once. Then she squared her shoulders, military straight despite everything, and began the longest walk of her life. Down the aisle, past the staring faces, past the whispers and the phones and the judgment. A warrior's walk of shame. And she had no idea that in less than an hour, everything would change. The jetway felt endless. Sarah Mitchell had walked through fire zones in Iraq. She'd traversed ice fields in the Arctic after a crash landing. She'd climbed down emergency ladders from burning ships. But this 50-foot carpeted corridor, lined with the curious stares of gate agents and boarding passengers, felt impossibly long. Behind her, she could hear the buzz of conversation erupting on the aircraft. Phones were definitely recording now. She'd seen at least a dozen pointed her way as she'd stood. The story was already being written. Homeless-looking woman removed from first class. The narrative was set before she'd even reached the gate. "Ma'am, if you'll just step over here," one of the security officers said, gesturing toward a corner near the gate desk. He was young, maybe 26, with kind eyes that didn't quite match the authority of his uniform. His name tag read Officer Martinez. "Am I under arrest?" Sarah asked quietly. "No, ma'am, nothing like that. Just need to get some information." The second officer, older and harder-faced with the name Officer Dawson, spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, this is Dawson. We've removed the passenger from Flight 2447, standing by at Gate 14 for instructions." Sarah set her backpack down, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. Years of training had taught her how to handle tense situations. Never make sudden moves, keep your hands visible, maintain calm. It felt surreal to be using combat de-escalation techniques in an airport terminal because she dressed comfortably. Gate agents pretended to work at their computers, but Sarah could feel their eyes flickering toward her. Passengers waiting for other flights openly stared. A little boy asked his mother, "Why did they take that lady off the plane?" The mother shushed him and turned away. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" Martinez asked, pulling out a small notebook. Sarah took a deep breath. "I boarded the aircraft with a valid ticket. A passenger complained about my appearance. The flight attendant demanded to see my credit card, which is not standard procedure. When I refused to submit to discriminatory treatment, they called you." Dawson snorted. "That's your version." "That's what happened," Sarah replied evenly. "The flight crew says you were belligerent and refused to cooperate. I refused to show my credit card, which they have no legal right to demand after I've cleared security with a valid boarding pass. Flight crew has authority to remove any passenger they deem disruptive," Dawson said, his tone suggesting the case was closed. I was sitting quietly in my seat. "That's not what they're saying." Martinez looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm sure this is frustrating, but the airline does have discretion to discriminate." Sarah's voice remained calm, but there was an edge now. "To remove paying customers based on how they look." "That's a strong accusation," Dawson said sharply. "You got any proof of that?" "About a dozen passengers recorded the entire interaction." "Then maybe those recordings will show why you needed to be removed." Dawson crossed his arms. "Look, lady, I don't know what your deal is. Maybe you saved up for a long time for that ticket, wanted to feel special for once, I get it. But you can't cause problems just because someone hurt your feelings." The condescension in his voice was like acid. Sarah felt her military composure cracking. "My feelings aren't the issue. The issue is that your airport just allowed a passenger to be removed based on appearance-based discrimination." "Big words," Dawson muttered. Martinez shot his partner a look. "Ma'am, here's what's going to happen. We're going to file a report. The airline will review the incident. If they determine the removal was unjustified, they'll compensate you. But for now, you're not getting back on that flight." "I need to get to Seattle." For the first time, Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "My mother is dying. I need to be there." Something in Martinez's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. We can help you rebook." "The next flight isn't for 6 hours." Sarah had checked before booking. "I might not have 6 hours." "I understand, but—" "Do you?" Sarah looked at both officers. "Do you understand what it's like to serve your country for 25 years, to give everything you have, and then be treated like garbage because you wore an old sweatshirt?" "Serve?" Martinez's eyebrows rose. "You're military." "Does it matter?" Sarah asked bitterly. "Would it change anything? Would I suddenly be worthy of basic human dignity if I had the right credentials?" Before Martinez could answer, Mark Chen emerged from the jetway looking flustered. Behind him, Richard Thornton appeared, his expensive shoes clicking on the terminal floor. "Officers, I need to make sure this is documented properly," Mark said, pulling out his own tablet. "This passenger created a significant disturbance, made other passengers uncomfortable, and refused multiple direct orders from crew." "That's an absolute lie," Sarah said flatly. "Are you calling me a liar?" Mark's face reddened. "Yes." Thornton stepped forward, clearly enjoying himself. "I was sitting right next to her. She was argumentative, hostile, and frankly, her presence made the entire cabin uncomfortable. I'm a platinum member, been flying this airline for 20 years. I know what belongs in first class, and he looked Sarah up and down with undisguised contempt, is not it." "Mr. Thornton is one of our most valued customers," Mark added, as if this settled the matter. "His complaint is not taken lightly." "And I'm just a woman in an old sweatshirt, so my word means nothing," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." A small crowd had gathered now, passengers from other gates, airport employees, curious onlookers. Most watched with the detached interest of people viewing a spectacle. A few recorded on their phones. No one intervened. Martinez looked between Mark and Sarah, clearly uncertain. "Sir, did this passenger actually do anything threatening? Use abusive language? Physically resist?" "She created a disturbance," Mark insisted. "That's grounds for removal under FAA regulations." "What disturbance?" Martinez pressed. "Specifically?" Mark hesitated. She argued. "She raised her voice. She made accusations against me and Mr. Thornton." "Did she threaten anyone?" "She didn't have to. Her attitude was threatening." "Her attitude?" Martinez's skepticism was growing. Dawson elbowed his partner. "Airlines can remove anyone for any reason. We're not here to judge, just to enforce their decision." "Their discriminatory decision," Sarah said. "Oh, here we go again with that," Thornton rolled his eyes. "Look, sweetheart, not everything is discrimination. Sometimes people just don't meet standards. That's life. Maybe use this as motivation to, I don't know, improve yourself. Get a better job. Buy some decent clothes." He actually smiled as if he were offering helpful advice. Sarah stared at him. In her career, she'd faced admirals who tried to block her promotions. She'd dealt with foreign military commanders who refused to negotiate with a woman. She'd survived attempted sabotage, discrimination, and outright hostility. She'd learned to respond with professionalism, with strategic patience, with cold calculation. But this casual cruelty from a man who knew nothing about her, who judged her worthless in seconds, who felt entitled to humiliate her publicly. "You have no idea," Sarah said, her voice shaking now, "who you're talking to." "Sure I do," Thornton laughed. "Some nobody who's mad she got caught where she doesn't belong." "Mr. Thornton, please," Martinez said. "Sir, can you step back?" But Thornton was on a roll, feeding off the attention. "This is what's wrong with the world today. no standards. Everyone thinks they deserve first class. Everyone thinks they're special. Well, newsflash, some of us actually earned it. Some of us actually worked for our success. We don't need charity cases playing dress-up and pretending. Attention on deck. The shout came from somewhere behind Sarah, a voice used to being heard over engines and storms and chaos. It was a command voice, sharp and absolute. Everyone froze. A figure in navy dress blues was striding toward them, his shoes clicking in perfect military cadence. Other passengers scrambled out of his way. He was young, maybe 30, but carried himself with unmistakable authority. And he was staring directly at Sarah with an expression of absolute shock. "Admiral Mitchell," Lieutenant James Cooper's voice cracked slightly. "Ma'am." The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Admiral, Lieutenant James Cooper had been having a good day. His leave had been approved, his flight to San Diego was on time, and he'd just gotten a text that his girlfriend said yes to his proposal. He was walking through O'Hare's Terminal 2, humming to himself, when he saw the crowd gathered near Gate 14. Normally, he'd have walked past. Airport drama wasn't his business, but something made him glance over, maybe the security officers, maybe the raised voices, maybe just instinct. And then he saw her. At first, his brain refused to process it. Admiral Sarah Mitchell, the Admiral Sarah Mitchell, hero of the Jakarta rescue, commander of Carrier Strike Group 11, the woman who'd given a speech at his academy graduation that had literally changed his life, was standing in an airport terminal looking exhausted and defeated, flanked by security officers like a common criminal. It couldn't be her, except it absolutely was. Cooper's body responded before his mind caught up. 23 years of training snapped into place. His spine straightened, his shoulders went back, and his right hand came up in the sharpest salute he'd ever given. "Attention on deck." The command came from somewhere deep in his chest, the voice he'd learned from drill instructors and perfected aboard ship. It was the kind of voice that could be heard across a flight deck in a storm. The entire terminal seemed to freeze. Cooper strode forward, his dress shoes clicking in perfect military rhythm. Passengers scattered out of his path. His eyes never left Sarah's face as he held his salute. "Admiral Mitchell, ma'am." His voice was crisp, professional, but couldn't quite hide his shock and confusion. "Lieutenant James Cooper, USS Ronald Reagan, ma'am." Sarah's eyes widened. For a split second, her carefully maintained composure cracked, and Cooper saw something raw in her expression: relief, exhaustion, and something that looked almost like despair. Then her training kicked in. Her spine straightened, her shoulders squared, and despite the stained sweatshirt and torn jeans, she suddenly looked exactly like what she was: a flag officer of the United States Navy. "At ease, Lieutenant," she said quietly, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. Cooper dropped his salute but remained at attention. "Ma'am, He looked around at the security officers, at the crowd, at Sarah's backpack on the floor. "Ma'am, what's happening here?" "Admiral," Officer Martinez's voice came out as a squeak. His face had gone completely white. "Did you say Admiral?" Dawson's aggressive posture had evaporated. He looked like he might be sick. Mark Chen stood frozen, his tablet hanging limp in his hands. The color was draining from his face in real time. But it was Richard Thornton who spoke first, his voice still carrying that confident edge, though it wavered slightly. "Admiral, that's ridiculous. She can't be, look at her." Cooper's head snapped toward Thornton like a weapon locking on target. "Sir, you will show respect when speaking about a flag officer of the United States Navy." His voice was ice cold. "Admiral Mitchell commands Carrier Strike Group 11. She's responsible for 6,000 personnel and over $40 billion in military assets. She's a recipient of the Distinguished Service Medal, the Navy Cross, and she's currently nominated for the Medal of Honor for the Jakarta rescue operation 3 weeks ago." The words landed like bombs. Jakarta, someone in the crowd whispered. That was her. The Medal of Honor. Oh my God, I saw that on the news. She saved like 50 people. Cooper was still talking, his voice rising with barely controlled anger. Ma'am, I was briefed on the Jakarta operation at yesterday's command meeting. Lieutenant Davis, he was one of the sailors pulled from the water. He's my best friend. He told me how you personally coordinated the rescue, how you overrode weather warnings to launch helicopters, how you, his voice cracked. Ma'am, you saved his life. You saved 47 lives. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Lieutenant, that's not. Ma'am, what are you doing out here? Cooper's confusion was genuine and profound. Why aren't you on the plane? Why are security officers? His eyes widened as understanding dawned. They didn't remove you from a flight. The silence was deafening. Martinez looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. We didn't know. You didn't know? Cooper's voice rose dangerously. You removed a uniformed flag officer from an aircraft. She's not in uniform, Dawson said weakly. She's off duty, Cooper looked incredulous. Officers don't wear uniforms 24/7. What possible reason could you have? He stopped, looking at Sarah's civilian clothes, at the stained sweatshirt and torn jeans. Understanding crossed his face, followed by raw fury. You removed her because of how she looks. Now wait just a minute, Mark started. You removed a two-star admiral from a flight because she wasn't dressed fancy enough. Cooper's voice carried across the terminal now. More people were gathering, phones out, recording everything. Do you have any idea what she's been doing? She's been at sea for 3 weeks, coordinating a rescue operation in a typhoon. She probably hasn't slept in days. And you removed her from a flight because her sweatshirt has a stain. A woman in the crowd gasped. That's why she looks tired, oh my God. She saved 50 people and they kicked her off a plane. Another voice said, horrified. This is going viral, someone muttered, already typing on their phone. Thornton tried to recover. Now see here, I didn't know she was military, if she just said something. Cooper wheeled on him. She shouldn't have to prove her worth to sit in a seat she paid for. She shouldn't. He stopped, his jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter but somehow more devastating. Sir, what you did is shameful. What all of you did is shameful. I was just doing my job, Mark protested weakly. Your job is to discriminate, Cooper shot back. Your job is to humiliate a war hero. War hero? A gate agent had emerged from behind the desk, her eyes wide. The Admiral Mitchell. From the news. Oh God, we studied the Jakarta rescue in our crisis management course last week. More whispers rippled through the crowd. I can't believe they kicked her off. Someone call the news. This is already on Twitter. #respect the Admiral is starting to trend. The airline is going to lose millions over this. Sarah stood in the center of it all, watching her privacy and anonymity dissolve in real time. Cooper saw her discomfort and stepped closer, lowering his voice. Ma'am, are you all right? Do you need me to contact the Navy? I can have a car here in 20 minutes. I can. Lieutenant, Sarah interrupted gently. Thank you, but I just need to get to Seattle. My mother is. Her voice faltered for the first time. Cooper's expression softened immediately. Your mother, ma'am, I'm so sorry. We'll get you there. I promise. Behind them, Dawson was frantically speaking into his radio. Dispatch, we need a supervisor at Gate 14 immediately. We have a situation, a significant situation. Martinez had pulled out his phone and was clearly searching for Sarah's name. His face went progressively more pale as he scrolled through results. Oh no, no. He looked at Sarah with stricken eyes. Ma'am, I am so sorry. We didn't. You didn't ask, Sarah said quietly. You made assumptions. You saw what you expected to see. An airport supervisor came running, radio squawking. A woman in an airline manager's uniform was speed-walking toward them, her expression one of absolute horror. Behind her, More Navy personnel in the terminal had noticed Cooper's salute and were gravitating toward the scene, their faces darkening as they realized what had happened. Mark Chen seemed to shrink with each passing second. He kept opening his mouth and closing it, unable to form words. Thornton, however, was backing away slowly, trying to disappear into the crowd. But Cooper's voice stopped him cold. "Sir, don't you dare walk away. You started this. You're going to see how it ends." A Navy commander pushed through the crowd, his ribbons identifying him as someone with serious credentials. He took one look at Sarah, snapped to attention, and saluted. "Admiral Mitchell, ma'am, Commander Peters, Naval Station Great Lakes. Ma'am, what can I do?" "I need," Sarah said, and her voice was tired beyond measure, "to get to Seattle. That's all, just Seattle." "Ma'am, I'll arrange a military transport immediately." "No," Sarah's voice was firm. "No special treatment, that's not what this is about." She looked around at the crowd, at the phones recording, at Mark and Thornton and the security officers. "This isn't about my rank. It's about every person who's been judged by their appearance. Every tired mother flying home to her kids. Every blue-collar worker who saved up for one nice flight. Every veteran who doesn't wear their service on their sleeve. They deserve dignity too." The terminal had gone completely silent. "I'm not special because I'm an admiral," Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I'm just a person who wore an old sweatshirt on a bad day, and that should have been enough." Airline Regional Manager Patricia Grayson arrived at Gate 14 looking like she just sprinted the length of the terminal, which she had. Her normally perfect appearance was disheveled, her blazer askew, sweat beading on her forehead. She'd been in a meeting when her assistant burst in, pale-faced, with a phone showing trending Twitter posts. "Respect the Admiral" was exploding. Videos of Sarah's removal were already circulating. News outlets were picking it up. And the tweets, thousands of them, were calling for boycotts, investigations, and heads to roll. Patricia had built her career on crisis management. She'd handled weather disasters, passenger incidents, even a minor crash landing. But this was a Category 5 hurricane, and it was already making landfall. She pushed through the crowd, saw the Navy uniforms, saw the woman in the stained sweatshirt at the center of it all, and felt her stomach drop to her shoes. "Admiral Mitchell," her voice came out higher than she'd intended. Sarah turned, and Patricia found herself looking into eyes that held decades of command. Even in civilian clothes, even exhausted, the woman radiated authority that made Patricia want to snap to attention, and she'd never served a day in her life. "I'm Patricia Grayson, Regional Manager for—" "I know who you are," Sarah said quietly. "Your employees removed me from Flight 2447. I'd like to know what you're going to do about it." Patricia's mind raced. Legal was probably already assembling. PR was definitely in meltdown. Corporate was undoubtedly on the phone with lawyers. But right now, in this moment, she had to try to salvage something from this disaster. "Admiral Mitchell, I cannot apologize enough. This is absolutely unacceptable, unconscionable. We will conduct a full investigation." "An investigation?" Lieutenant Cooper's voice was sharp. The Admiral was humiliated, discriminated against, and forcibly removed from an aircraft she had every right to be on. What exactly needs investigating? Patricia saw Mark Chen trying to edge away toward the jetway. "Mr. Chen, stay exactly where you are." Her voice cracked like a whip. Mark froze. Jessica Reynolds, who'd been standing near the gate desk looking like she might pass out, visibly flinched. "Both of you here, now." They approached like students called to the principal's office. Mark's earlier confidence had evaporated entirely. His hands trembled as he clutched his tablet. "Explain," Patricia said, her voice deadly calm. "Explain to me how a paying passenger with a valid ticket ended up being removed from an aircraft." "Ma'am, Mark's voice cracked. "There was a complaint from Mr. Thornton. He's a platinum member and he felt uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable," Patricia's voice rose. Uncomfortable with what exactly? Mark's eyes darted to Sarah, then away. With the passenger's appearance. The words hung in the air like a confession at trial. "Let me make sure I understand," Patricia said, each word deliberate. "You removed a paying passenger because another passenger didn't like how she looked." "It wasn't just that," Mark said desperately. "She wouldn't show her credit card when I asked." "Why did you ask for her credit card?" Patricia's eyes were laser-focused now. To verify the purchase. After she'd cleared security, after she'd been scanned at the gate, after her boarding pass was confirmed valid, Patricia's voice was rising with each question. "What policy, specifically, gave you authority to demand a passenger's credit card at that point?" Mark's mouth opened and closed silently. Jessica spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Thornton was very insistent, ma'am. He threatened to complain to corporate. He said he'd switch airlines if we didn't handle it." "So you chose to appease one passenger by humiliating another?" Patricia turned to Jessica. "Did it occur to you that handling it might mean standing up for a passenger being discriminated against?" "I didn't know she was an admiral." "Would it have mattered if she wasn't?" Commander Peters cut in. "Would discrimination be acceptable if she was just a regular person, a teacher, a nurse, a construction worker?" Jessica's face crumpled. "No, sir, I don't know, I was just trying to." "You were trying to take the path of least resistance," Patricia said coldly. "And in doing so, you violated every value this airline claims to stand for." Movement caught Patricia's eye. Thornton was definitely trying to leave now, inching backward through the crowd. "Mr. Thornton," Patricia's voice stopped him dead. "Don't even think about it." Thornton turned, attempting a smile that came off as a grimace. "Look, this has all been a misunderstanding. I didn't know she was military. If she just said something." "Why should she have to?" A voice called from the crowd. More people were agreeing now, emboldened. "You judged her based on her clothes. This is discrimination. I'm never flying this airline again." Thornton's face reddened. "I have rights too. I'm a platinum member. I've spent hundreds of thousands with this airline." "Had," Patricia corrected icily. "You had platinum status. As of this moment, Mr. Thornton, your membership is revoked. All of it. Your miles, your status, your benefits. Gone." "You can't do that," Thornton sputtered. "I'll sue, You'll what?" Patricia's voice was steel. "Sue us for refusing to enable your discrimination. Please do. I'd love to see that play out in court. Better yet, I'd love to see it play out in the media, which I believe is already happening." She gestured to the dozens of phones recording every word. Thornton looked around wildly, seeing for the first time how the crowd was looking at him, with disgust, with contempt, with the same judgment he'd so casually dispensed toward Sarah. "I want to speak to someone higher up," he demanded, but his voice had lost its authority. "I am higher up," Patricia said, "and this conversation is over. Security, please escort Mr. Thornton from the terminal. He is no longer welcome on any of our flights." "What, you can't? I have a ticket." "You had a ticket. Now you have a refund and a permanent ban from this airline." Patricia nodded to the security officers, who looked relieved to finally have clear instructions. As Dawson and Martinez moved toward Thornton, Martinez paused by Sarah. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology, a serious apology. I should have questioned what was happening. I should have." "You followed orders," Sarah said quietly. "But next time I hope you'll ask more questions before you do." Martinez nodded, looking genuinely ashamed. Even Dawson, who'd been so dismissive earlier, couldn't meet her eyes as they escorted a still protesting Thornton away. Patricia turned back to Sarah. "Admiral Mitchell, I know words are inadequate, but I am truly, deeply sorry for what happened to you today. This airline failed you. My employees failed you. And I failed you by creating a culture where this kind of discrimination could happen." Sarah studied her for a long moment, What happens to them? She nodded toward Mark and Jessica. They're suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Based on what I've witnessed, I expect termination will follow. Jessica let out a small sob. Mark stood rigid, his career crashing down around him. Admiral, Patricia continued, I'd like to offer you. No, Sarah interrupted. I don't want special treatment. I don't want compensation or upgrades or whatever you're about to offer. Ma'am, please, we need to make this right. You can't, Sarah said simply. You can't undo what happened, but what you can do is make sure it never happens again. To anyone, train your employees, change your policies, create systems where a passenger can't be removed simply because someone else finds them aesthetically displeasing. Lieutenant Cooper's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his eyes widened. Ma'am, this is everywhere. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they're all covering it. The hashtag has over 1 million tweets. There are calls for congressional hearings on airline discrimination. Patricia felt her knees weaken. 1 million tweets, congressional hearings. Her phone was vibrating nonstop in her pocket, undoubtedly corporate melting down. Admiral Mitchell, she said desperately, please, let me get you to Seattle. Military transport, private charter, whatever you need. Your mother, Lieutenant Cooper, mentioned your mother is ill. Let us at least do that. For the first time, Sarah's composure cracked just slightly. Her mother. She needed to get to her mother. Commander Peters stepped forward. Ma'am, I have a citation ready at the private terminal. I can have you in Seattle in 3 hours, please. Sarah looked at the crowd, at the cameras, at the mess her simple desire to visit her dying mother had created. She was so tired, so incredibly tired. All right, she said quietly. Thank you, Commander. As the Navy personnel began coordinating her transport, Patricia pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She had to call corporate. She had to call legal. She had to start the biggest PR damage control operation of her career. But as she watched Admiral Sarah Mitchell walk away with dignity intact despite everything, Patricia knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was going to change everything. Sarah Mitchell stood in the center of the terminal, surrounded by Navy personnel, airline staff, security officers, and what had grown to nearly 200 onlookers. Phones were raised like lighters at a concert, all pointed at her. She could feel the weight of their expectation. They wanted her to be angry, to rage, to demand heads on plates. But that wasn't who she was. Wait, she said quietly, stopping Commander Peters mid-coordination. Before I go, I need to say something. The terminal fell silent. Even the ambient airport announcements seemed to fade into the background. Sarah turned to face the crowd and something in her posture shifted. This wasn't the exhausted woman who'd been humiliated an hour ago. This was a flag officer who'd commanded thousands, who'd stood before Congress, who'd delivered eulogies for fallen sailors. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the space. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a Rear Admiral in the United States Navy. I've served for 25 years, most of my adult life. But today, none of that mattered. Today, I was judged worthless because I wore an old sweatshirt and looked tired. She paused, letting the words sink in. I'm traveling to Seattle to see my mother. She's dying. Sarah's voice caught slightly, but she pushed through. She has maybe a week left, maybe less. She's 73 years old and she spent her entire life working 3 jobs to raise me alone. She cleaned houses, waited tables, worked night shifts at a factory. She wore second-hand clothes from thrift stores so I could have new school uniforms. She drove a car held together with duct tape and prayer so I could go to college. Several people in the crowd wiped their eyes. My mother taught me that a person's worth, their real worth, has nothing to do with their clothes or their bank account or what seat they sit in. It has to do with their character, their integrity, how they treat others, especially when those others can't do anything for them. Sarah looked directly at Mark and Jessica, who stood frozen near the gate desk. You failed that test today, Both of you. You saw someone you judged as beneath you and you treated them accordingly. You didn't see a person. You didn't see someone's daughter rushing to her dying mother. You saw a problem to be solved, an inconvenience to be removed. Mark's face was wet with tears now. Jessica had her hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. Here's what you didn't see, Sarah continued, her voice strengthening. You didn't see the thousands of Americans who fly every single day looking exactly like I did today. The construction worker heading home after a 12-hour shift. The nurse who just finished a double in the ER. The truck driver visiting grandkids. The veteran with PTSD who can barely stand to be in crowds. The cancer patient flying to treatment. The single parent who saved for a year to afford one nice flight. The crowd was completely still, hanging on every word. Every single one of them deserves dignity. Every single one of them deserves respect. Not because of their rank or their wealth or their clothes, but because they're human beings. Because in this country, we're supposed to believe that all people are created equal. A woman in the crowd called out, "That's right." Others murmured agreement. Sarah turned to Patricia Grayson. You asked what you can do to make this right. You can't undo what happened to me, but you can make sure it never happens to anyone else. Train your employees, really train them, not just a video they click through, on recognizing their own biases. Create clear policies that protect passengers from discrimination. Empower your staff to stand up when they see injustice, even if it costs you a high-paying customer. Patricia nodded vigorously, taking notes on her phone. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. We'll implement mandatory anti-discrimination training across all divisions. We'll establish an independent review board for passenger complaints. And fire anyone who can't meet that standard, Sarah interrupted firmly. Because this isn't about one bad day or one mistake. This is about fundamental respect for human dignity. Either your employees understand that, or they shouldn't be working with the public. She turned to the security officers. Martinez and Dawson stood at attention, though no one had ordered them to. You two did what you thought was your job, but your job isn't just to enforce rules, it's to question whether those rules are being applied fairly. Next time someone tells you to remove a passenger, ask why. Ask for specifics. Don't just accept that someone doesn't belong because another person says so. Yes, ma'am, Martinez said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you, ma'am, I will never forget this. Dawson, who'd been so dismissive earlier, looked like he'd aged 10 years. Ma'am, I have a daughter. She's about your age. If someone treated her the way we treated you, he couldn't finish. Sarah's expression softened slightly. Then teach her to question authority when authority is wrong. Teach her to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That's how things change. She looked around at the crowd, at the hundreds of eyes watching her, at the phones recording every word for millions more to see. I don't want people to remember this story as Admiral gets special treatment after mistreatment. I want people to remember it as human being denied dignity, and society said that's not acceptable. Because I'm not special. I'm just a person who happened to have rank that got revealed. But what about all the people whose rank never gets revealed? What about the people who don't have lieutenants appearing to vouch for them? They deserve justice too. A reporter had materialized in the crowd. Sarah could spot them by the professional camera and the press badge. Admiral Mitchell, do you think this represents a larger problem in American society? Sarah considered the question carefully. I think we live in a world that's forgotten how to see people. We see categories. We see stereotypes. We see what we expect to see based on superficial markers. Someone wearing expensive clothes, we assume they're successful and deserving of respect. Someone wearing worn clothes, we assume they're not. But clothes tell you nothing about a person's worth. Nothing about their struggles, their victories, their humanity. Another reporter called out, "Will you be pressing charges against the airline?" No, Sarah said firmly, because I don't want punishment. I want change, real systemic change. I want every airline, every business, every institution to look at what happened here and ask themselves, Could this happen on our watch? And if the answer is yes, I want them to fix it. Lieutenant Cooper stepped closer. Ma'am, your mother, we need to get you moving. Sarah nodded, suddenly looking exhausted again. The adrenaline that had carried her through the speech was fading, leaving only the bone-deep weariness she'd been fighting for days. One more thing, she said, her voice quieter now. To everyone watching this, everyone who will see this video later, if you see someone being treated unfairly, speak up. Don't just record it for social media. Actually intervene. Be the person who says this isn't right. Because silence in the face of injustice makes you complicit. She picked up her backpack, and Commander Peters immediately tried to take it from her. She waved him off with a small smile. I've got it, Commander. I may be an admiral, but I can still carry my own bag. As she turned to leave, the crowd began to applaud. It started with one person, then spread like wildfire through the terminal. People stood, clapping, some crying, some saluting even though they'd never served. Sarah paused, overwhelmed. She'd received medals, commendations, awards from presidents and foreign leaders. But this raw, genuine recognition of shared humanity meant more than any of them. She raised one hand in acknowledgement, then walked toward the exit with her escort of Navy personnel. Behind her, Patricia Grayson was already on the phone with corporate, her voice urgent. I don't care what it costs. We're implementing every change she suggested, and we're doing it now. Today. This ends today. Mark and Jessica sat on chairs by the gate desk, their careers over, facing the consequences of their assumptions. And somewhere in the crowd, a young flight attendant on her first week of work watched Admiral Mitchell leave and made herself a promise. She would never, ever judge a passenger by their appearance. She would remember this day for the rest of her career. Change had begun. Not because of rank or authority, but because one woman had the courage to demand the dignity that every human being deserves. The Citation jet cut through the evening sky at 41,000 feet, racing the setting sun westward. Sarah Mitchell sat in the leather seat, finally alone except for Commander Peters, who'd respectfully moved to the back of the cabin to give her space. Through the window, she watched clouds painted gold and crimson by the dying light. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. Messages from Navy colleagues, from old academy classmates, from people she hadn't heard from in years. The Secretary of Defense had called personally. So had 2 senators. CNN wanted an interview. The New York Times wanted a statement. The airline's CEO had left 3 voicemails, each more apologetic than the last. Sarah turned the phone off. None of it mattered. Not the apologies, not the outrage, not the trending hashtags or the cable news debates. All that mattered was 3 hours away in a hospital room in Seattle. Ma'am, Peters approached tentatively, holding a bottle of water. You should drink something. When's the last time you ate? Sarah tried to remember. The Pentagon cafeteria, that was 14 hours ago, longer. I'm fine, Commander. With respect, ma'am, you're not. You've been running on fumes for weeks. The Jakarta operation, the debriefing, now this. He set the water down gently. At least hydrate. Your mother would want you to take care of yourself. That got through. Sarah took the water, managing a small smile. You're right, she would. She drank half the bottle, realizing how thirsty she actually was. Her phone, even powered off, sat in her hand like a weight. She thought about everything that had happened in the last 4 hours. The humiliation, the removal, the revelation, the speech. It already felt like it had happened to someone else. But it hadn't. It had happened to her. And more importantly, it happened to people every single day, people who didn't have rank or recognition to save them. Do you regret it, ma'am? Peters asked quietly, speaking out like that. Sarah considered the question. No, but I regret that it took my rank being revealed for people to care. That's the part that bothers me. I shouldn't have needed to be an admiral for my dignity to matter. But now maybe it'll matter for everyone, Peters offered, because of what you said, how you said it. Maybe, Sarah leaned her head back, closing her eyes. I hope so. 3 hours later, the Citation touched down at Boeing Field. A Navy car was waiting, blue lights flashing. Sarah's brother, Michael, stood beside it, his face etched with worry and relief. Sarah, he pulled her into a fierce hug the moment she stepped onto the tarmac. I've been watching the news. Jesus, Sarah, are you okay? I'm fine, how's Mom? Michael's expression told her everything before he said a word. She's hanging on, barely. She's been asking for you every 10 minutes. His voice cracked. She saw the videos, Sarah. Someone showed her on their phone. She's so proud of you and so angry at those people. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since the whole ordeal began. Let's go, now. The drive to Swedish Medical Center took 12 minutes. Every one of them felt like an hour. Michael filled her in. Mom had declined rapidly over the past week. Pneumonia on top of the cancer. The doctors had made her comfortable, but there wasn't much time left. Sarah's hands trembled as they walked through the hospital corridors. She'd faced enemy fire, commanded in crisis situations, made life-and-death decisions affecting thousands. But walking into her mother's room terrified her. The woman in the bed looked impossibly small. Margaret Mitchell had always seemed larger than life, tough, fierce, indomitable. Now she was fragile, tubes and monitors surrounding her like a technical cage. But when she saw Sarah, her eyes lit up with the same spark Sarah remembered from childhood. There's my girl, Margaret whispered, her voice papery thin. Sarah crossed the room in 2 strides, taking her mother's hand carefully, mindful of the IV. Hi, Mom, I'm here. I'm sorry it took so long. Nonsense, you were busy putting people in their place. A ghost of Margaret's famous smile appeared. That's my daughter, still fighting. Mom, you should rest. I've been resting for a week. I'll rest permanently soon enough. Margaret squeezed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. I saw what happened. That man, that awful man who judged you, the people who removed you from that plane. It doesn't matter now. It matters, Margaret insisted, her voice gaining strength. It matters because that's what I faced my whole life. People looking at my second-hand clothes, my calloused hands, my old car, and deciding I was nobody, that I didn't deserve respect. Her eyes filled with tears. I never wanted that for you. That's why I worked myself to the bone so you could have better. And you gave me better, Mom. You gave me everything. I gave you the tools. You built the rest yourself. Margaret's breathing was labored, but she kept talking. What you said in that airport, about dignity, about worth, Sarah, that's everything I tried to teach you. You took my lesson and spoke it to the world. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face now. I learned from the best. They sat in silence for a while, just holding hands. Michael brought chairs, and they settled in for the long night ahead. Outside the window, Seattle glowed in the darkness. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, but each time she woke, she smiled to see Sarah there. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, funny stories, regrets, and triumphs. Michael shared updates about his kids, Margaret's grandchildren. For a few hours, it was just a family together. Around 3 a.m., a nurse came in to check vitals. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and she recognized Sarah immediately. Admiral Mitchell, the nurse's voice was reverent. I watched the video, what you said. She paused, collecting herself. My mom cleans houses. She flies home to the Philippines once a year, and she always looks so tired, so worn down. Last time she flew, someone complained about her sitting near them in coach. The flight attendant made her move to the very back row, away from everyone. Sarah felt anger flare. Did she report it? To who? She doesn't speak English well. She was embarrassed. She just accepted it. The nurse's eyes met Sarah's. But after today, after hearing you, she called me. She said maybe things could be different now. Maybe people would think twice. They will, Sarah said firmly. They have to. After the nurse left, Margaret stirred. That's your legacy, Sarah. Not the medals, not the ships, not the rank. It's making one young woman believe her mother deserves dignity. That's your legacy too, Mom. You taught me to see people as people. Then I did something right. Margaret's breathing was shallower now. I'm so tired, baby. I know, Mom, it's okay to rest. You'll be okay, you promise. I promise. Margaret closed her eyes, a peaceful expression settling over her face. Sarah held her hand and sang softly, an old lullaby her mother used to sing to her decades ago. Margaret Mitchell passed away at 4:47 a.m., surrounded by her children, having seen her daughter stand up for every person who'd ever been judged unworthy. 6 months later, Sarah stood at a podium in the airline's training facility, addressing 200 flight attendants, gate agents, and managers. It was one of dozens of such talks she'd given in the months since that day in Chicago. Behind her, a screen showed the now famous video from O'Hare. She'd watched it hundreds of times. Each time she saw something new, not in herself, but in the faces of the crowd. The moment understanding dawned. The moment people chose to care. My mother died the night I gave that speech in the terminal, Sarah told the room. In a way, she died knowing that maybe, just maybe, her struggles meant something. That the discrimination she faced her whole life might not be something future generations have to endure. The room was silent, attentive. You have power, Sarah continued. Every day you interact with hundreds of people, thousands over your career. Each one of them is someone's mother, father, child, friend. Each one of them has a story you don't know, and you get to choose, are you going to judge that story by its cover, or are you going to treat every person with the dignity they deserve? After the presentation, a young flight attendant approached her, nervous, earnest. Admiral Mitchell, I was working that day, not on your flight but at O'Hare. I saw them walk you off, and she swallowed hard. I didn't say anything, I just watched. I'm so ashamed. Sarah put a hand on her shoulder. What matters is what you do next time. Will you speak up? Yes, ma'am, I swear it. Then that's enough. The changes had been dramatic. The airline had implemented comprehensive training, created an independent oversight board, and fired 12 employees who refused to acknowledge their biases. Mark Chen and Jessica Reynolds had been terminated, though Sarah heard Mark had since enrolled in diversity training courses and was trying to understand what he'd done wrong. Richard Thornton had sued the airline, claiming discrimination against platinum members. The case was laughed out of court. He'd since deleted all his social media accounts after becoming a symbol of entitled prejudice. More importantly, other airlines had followed suit. Airports had updated their procedures. Congress had held hearings. The TSA had revised training protocols. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was progress. Sarah had received the Medal of Honor for Jakarta. The ceremony was beautiful, but she wore her mother's old watch to the White House, not for rebellion but for remembrance. That evening, back in her quarters at the Pentagon, Sarah opened her laptop. She'd been writing something, a memoir maybe, or maybe just reflections. She typed a final paragraph. My mother taught me that clothes don't make a person. Status doesn't make a person. Money doesn't make a person. What makes a person is how they treat others when no one is watching, when there's nothing to gain, when kindness is simply the right thing to do. That day in Chicago, I lost my anonymity but found my voice. And if that voice helps even one person stand a little taller, travel a little easier, exist with a little more dignity, then every moment of humiliation was worth it. Because that's what my mother would have wanted. That's what she taught me. That's her legacy, and now it's mine to carry forward. She saved the file and closed her laptop. On her desk sat a photo, her mother, young and strong, holding baby Sarah. Both of them were smiling. We did it, Mom, Sarah whispered to the photo. Things are changing. Outside her window, Washington, D.C. glittered in the night. Somewhere in that city, policies were being written. Training programs were being designed. People were learning to see each other differently. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't complete, but it was a start. And sometimes a start is everything. Sarah Mitchell, Admiral, warrior, and her mother's daughter, turned off the light and finally, after 6 months of barely sleeping, allowed herself to rest. The fight was far from over, but for tonight she'd done enough. The end.